Welcome to Out of the Lab, a podcast interviewing entrepreneurs who've taken research out of the lab and built it into a company that's serving the world. These entrepreneurs are heroes, and the planet needs more of them. So tune in, learn from their successes and failures, and get inspired. Visit bountiful.org to join our community and realize your power to save the world. Hello and welcome to Out of the Lab. I'm your host, Max Finder, and we're here with Fernando Gómez-Baquero. Thanks for joining us, Fernando.
Thank you for having me, Max.
So Fernando holds a Ph.D. in Nanoscale Science and Engineering from the College of Nanoscale Science and Engineering at the University of Albany SUNY. Your research focused on advanced nanomaterials for energy storage applications. You also focused on production and characterization of carbon nanotubes and developing polymer nanotube composites. You're a leader in the fabrication of nano-engineered electrodes for lithium-ion batteries, using semiconductor processes and using nanotechnology to improve the performance of lithium-ion batteries. But you're currently at Cornell Tech running the Runway and Spinouts program. That's correct, yeah?
Yes, that's correct.
And you have a pretty rich history as far as translational science and commercializing technology and spin-offs and stuff like that. So I actually want to get started, if you don't mind, with like you're actually presently also the CEO and co-founder of Besstech. Is that also accurate?
Yes, that's the electrode battery company that we did when I was back at the SUNY at the College of Nanoscale Science and Engineering. And that company is still running.
And are you actively involved in it?
It's more of a licensing play at this point in time, but yes, I'm actively running it.
So can you tell for our listeners kind of what that means? Like, was this part of your PhD research? I feel like there's a couple of technologies that were licensed from a university that are the foundation for Besttech. Can you tell us a bit about, the high level on the technology and sort of how it came to be and where it is today? Just curious on your experience with it all. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe taking a step back from that, my background initially was not in material science, in nanoscale engineering. I was more into economics and finance. My undergrad is in industrial engineering, but it was more focused on the finance aspect of things, which I never really liked, to be honest. So I was always looking at something different to do. But that really prompted me to always be looking for the way to commercialize technologies, because that's what I thought it was interesting. I was never really interested in doing the banking stuff, but I always said all these great engineering things that people are doing, we should be commercializing that. And that's how I got involved into doing nanotubes and nanowires and nanotechnology in general. I just thought, wow, there's a great opportunity to do something interesting and commercialize all of that. When I came to Albany, to the College of Nanoscale Science and Engineering, I was just mind blown because there were so many interesting new technologies, so much potential. And we toyed around with different technologies. There was a solar technology, was a semiconductor technology, shape-shifting materials that some people were doing. And this one ended up being the dissertation of a friend of mine that then, actually a couple of friends of mine, then became the thesis of one of my friends, the full-on thesis on the electrode. And that's how I associated myself with that too. But basically my thesis was more directed towards the economic impact of these type of technologies. And between the both of us, we just saw the opportunity, which was very serendipitous, but we saw the opportunity of taking this silicon nanowire technology out of the lab and creating it into a company. But by all means, it was not the first one that I tried or I was looking for. There were a couple of ones that I thought it was going to be great, but I ended up really focusing then on batteries in a little bit of a serendipitous way.
So there were a couple of technologies that coming out of SUNY Albany, and that the College of Nanoscale Science and Engineering that you were looking at and evaluating potentially to try to commercialize, and you settled on the technology that your friend had invented and included as
Yeah.
part of his thesis?
Yeah, exactly. I wouldn't say settled. I would say that
Yeah.
it was no, because yeah, we definitely didn't settle. It's a very, very interesting technology. But what happened was that there were a couple of technologies. I remember there was a business competition, and I was tied to two groups. One that was developing an emission display technology, and the other one that was developing this nanowire electrode for lithium-ion batteries. And the business competition, all of a sudden, this one, the battery one, won. And we hadn't really done that much work. It was a PowerPoint at that point in time and an idea. But that really sort of like sprung everything. It made it very real, and it made us really sit down and figure out what that meant. The first CEO of the company was not myself, was a friend of mine, Brian, and it just got a life of its own, and that was very interesting to see. So when I say serendipitous, it was because of that. We weren't really completely focused on a particular type of technology, but once it got a life of its own, we just rolled with it.
And what did it feel like when it got a life of its own? Like, how did you know that it had a life of its own? What are some of the signs that you started to observe and get the feeling that this is cooking, so to speak?
I think the first sign was that people were saying, I think this is a good idea. Once you hear from someone else and not just from your head, that's always a good thing. So that really taught me you need to talk about what you're doing. And then when we got a little bit of money from that competition, and it wasn't that much.
Do you remember how much? Yeah, I was about to ask.
Well, it was 11,000,
wow.
and a lot of that was in services, and I think there was some of that in services, but we did end up saying with this we can do a patent. That at that point in time we hadn't even thought about, but we said maybe we can file a patent. And by doing that work, once you say, okay, let's try to do a patent and sit down and figure out both the technology side, if there's something novel here, and the business side also, if there's novel here, things just seem to click. I think we realized it when we said, look, the need is there, the market is big. This really seems to be a unique technology. And I don't know, you can't really pinpoint the time, but what you can definitely say is you start seeing the trends. And that, not to say that we didn't screw up with a lot of things during the process, but definitely if the trends that you're seeing and the positive things really are outweighing the challenges, I think that's when you start saying this is interesting, this is fascinating. And I think it's just a problem of the value has always been there, the problem with batteries.
Right. Well, yeah, and you're trying to prove a thesis, right? And so you're trying to just continue to add support to your case that this technology will be meaningful and inching it forward slowly, right? So the patent was the first thing that you decided to do. Did you engage the TTO? Were they the technology transfer organization? Were they helpful? What did you do after the patent? How did you even go about doing that?
So I hope that not to say anything bad about the SUNY system at that point in time, but no, they weren't really helpful. We've had to do all of the work. Universities, and particularly as large as the SUNY system, have gotten much better at doing tech transfer and doing that patenting. At that point in time, that college was fairly new. There wasn't really an officer there that could help us do the tech transfer. So we just went ahead and we got a good lawyer and really did a lot of the work. And in a sense, that was a blessing, because doing that, I see now a lot of people are saying, okay, I have this idea, I give it to a lawyer, let them write it. We had to write it. Right. We had to really understand what that meant. And I had no idea what a claim was and how to write claims. And through the process, you learn a lot. Through the process, you really, I know that patent by heart. I know exactly what it has, and all of the conversations behind that we had on, is this novel or not? How do we talk about this? So that was a great process to go through. And yes, it stemmed from the fact that we didn't have that much help, but it turned out to be still the right thing to do, to get very involved in doing that.
So just to jump forward, only because I'm interested, is that something that you advise some of the companies that you incubate at Runway now? Do you advise them to get their hands dirty and try to write these claims on patents and to really understand their intellectual property? Or do you also, you also provide them enough support to bring them lawyers and attorneys to help them, right?
Yeah, we don't provide them support, and I always tell them that they're spoiled.
Right.
I want them to know that, because at this point in time, they have a lawyer, which is a boutique firm that really helps them, and it's wonderful. But I do advise them to sit down and really figure out at least the claims. That they should do the whole thing, but they should have a lot of saying in what the claims are and what the novelty of this is. And by doing the work, really understanding where the innovation is. So I definitely learned that, and that's something that I advise now moving forward.
And what do you think, let's say I don't have a technology that I need to write a patent for, but I am interested in learning about patents, claims, IP, different pieces of the process. I mean, are there resources, or how would you recommend somebody in my position or otherwise try to improve their knowledge and get experience on that?
I think you just made a good point that is worth saying. Is not everything needs to be patented, and there is and at that point in time, I thought that everything had to be patented. I don't think so anymore. And what I would recommend is there's a lot of seminars out there, webinars, now that everything is via Zoom. I think that there are things more accessible, but try to find information that talks about not only patenting as intellectual property, but intellectual property is also know-how and trade secrets. And those are the two that people never really talk about. So I would, instead of just go out there and say, oh, how do I patent and how do I do about patenting? There's lots of resources out there. I even recommend when this pandemic ends to go to the USPTO office. It's great. It's a great experience to just go there and sit down there and search for patents. It's cool.
That's actually hilarious. I wouldn't even know where that is. I assume it's in Washington.
In Virginia, yeah.
It's in Virginia. So what's the experience? What's the experience like going there? I mean, there's computers that you can search through things, and you can see even probably, I guess, a ledger of analog filed patents that.
Exactly. It's been a while since I've been there, so I hope that they've now remodeled the place a little bit. When I went there, it was this like 70s, 80s office with old computers where you could search. Most of that is cataloged right now online. But I do think that going there, you can talk to some of the USPTO officers. You can review some of the old patents. I think that just the whole experience is like to sit down and really do the process of discovery. It's research, so it's very interesting. But also, in addition to that, to going through that experience, I do think that people need to start reaching out and talking to people about know-how and trade secrets, and how do those two play a role in what is a larger context of intellectual property. And not everything needs to be patented. Actually, software is really difficult to patent right now, even though it's possible. And I think more people need to understand what are the things that they need to say, what are the things that they need to publish, what are the things that they don't need to publish, how to take care of code. Those things are more predominant right now.
And these know-how and trade secrets, these are things that still can offer a meaningful degree of protection for your intellectual property without having, I mean, patents are a very draining process, right? It's long, it's arduous, it's draining on financial resources, right? And so I guess know-how and trade secrets is less intense on that side of things. Is that the benefit of it in part? Yeah.
Not necessarily that it's less intense. I think is the one that really gives you control and gives you understanding of what you're doing. The reality is that after that big fight that happened a few years back with Google and Samsung and Apple and everybody suing each other, what I realized was you know what, patents don't really matter if you're big enough to pay fees. So if you, let's say that Samsung does something, infringes on your patent, and they might get a fine of $1 billion, that's really nothing for them.
Right.
And so, not to say that they're doing it, and I don't want to say anything bad about these companies that do amazing, wonderful innovation, but the reality is that someplace in the world, maybe someone could infringe your patent, and you wouldn't have the resources to fight for it. You wouldn't have the bandwidth to fight for it. So the reality is that the more that you can do to, first off, keep innovating and keep really driving the market. And that's the important part too, is just having a piece of paper does nothing. It's how you commercialize things and how do you relate to your customers and how do you build those customer relationships that give you that advantage. But also knowing how to protect yourself in the future, how to not really share everything that you're doing. And you can see it right now. That's a beautiful thing about Tech Talk. Everybody's talking about the code and the algorithm and everything. You know, this thing is not patented. You can't see it out there in a piece of paper. But someone developed something that is very interesting and unique, and they're keeping it very close to their chest.
Right, and also the know-how, the trade secrets, and these other things that build the moat, right? That is the most important defensible thing, right? So patent is a type of moat, but also being first or having network effects or any of these other type of things is another equally valid way to defend your technology and your position in the market, right?
Yeah, and even more important right now, I think. So Warren Buffett was right that you need to have a moat at this point in time, and the market is just moving so fast that having a technology that you patented and that is the same one for 10 years is going to be is a rarity
Right.
anymore. It just doesn't happen that way. So what you really need to figure out is, what do I have right now that I can quickly deploy, can quickly develop, and how do I build those relationships that are going to allow me to just be more competitive than anyone else.
And this is something that you preach at Runway, is this constant need to iterate and innovate. I mean, is it something that you tell the people in the program, like, hey, the thing you're inventing now is going to look completely different, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so the Runway program, and thank you actually for giving the opportunity to talk about the Runway program at the Jacobs Institute at Cornell Tech. It's really an experiment because there's a lot of people like myself that really started with this idea. Well, we're scientists, right? So we start with this idea that I can build something and that thing is amazing and I patent it and then I become a trillionaire. Right? So that's what people always are thinking. But that's not the process. So what we really do is say, how can we help people that have amazing technical knowledge, but help them understand that it's not just about building a good technology, but is how do you build a company and just a value proposition behind it? How do you understand what the customer wants? And that is really what we're preaching. What we're preaching is way beyond just developing a particular technology. Therefore, not only does it need to do more than just a technology, you need to build a team, you need to get the resources to do commercialization, to build your customer relationships, you need to understand the real value. All of those things are the ones that we preach. And the beautiful thing about this program is that it's catered to a population, which are scientists, people that are recently graduated from their PhDs or that are doing postdocs, that like myself, never been in the position to do this and have been really hunkered down in a lab, which is what they should have done. And I did too. I was a lab rat for many years. And they just haven't had the opportunity to learn all of this and put it in practice. So that's the beautiful thing about the program.
You think being a lab rat is an important part of the journey that, a lot of people should have?
I would like to think so, because I was one. So I always like to learn of all of the experiences that I have. I think what I tell most people and the people that I mentor is having a wide set of experiences is really important. I used to say something that I still think is true, that is, I think nowadays you need to learn more than what you're supposed to learn, or you need to do more than what you're supposed to do. So if you are supposed to sort of like be a lab rat right now and you're in grad school and you're doing that, you should do more stuff. You should really go out and do a lot of the commercialization and see other things. If you're more focused on the commercialization or you're doing marketing, you should actually try to be a lab rat too and try to get that other experience, because it's wonderful. Once you have all of these different experiences, you get to understand really what people are thinking, what they're living, what are they doing, the difficulties of that. And I think that makes for a great CEO and a great manager, someone that has empathy for what these other people are doing. Doesn't mean that you have to be a lab rat forever, but if you have empathy for the people that are doing that, you understand where they are and why they're doing it.
Right. It's hard to manage something that you haven't at least touched or experienced a little bit yourself, I guess.
Yeah.
And so if we go back to your experience with this spin out, Besstech, you guys did the patent. And so I guess I'm curious, like what maybe about some of the mistakes you made or some of the things that or the things you did right, even that you're now leading Runway and advising these postdocs in your program to do or not to do. Are there any very high level things that stand out in that regard?
Yeah, so things that we did right during that period, I think that we definitely had something novel. We took the time and we did the effort to understand why was it novel, why was it different, and therefore why it was granted as a patent. We did touch on a market that was growing, that is booming, and even till today is a market that is still growing. So that is great. And the approach that we had on what we were doing not only was unique, but overall really brought a lot of benefits also forward. So it's not that you're building something for just the now. There's a lot of iterations that you can see in the future. I think that we did that well. Another thing that we did well was from the beginning, there was a program at NYSERDA. NYSERDA was one of our biggest helpers, and they gave us a lot of grant funding to develop the technology. But there was one grant from NYSERDA, which was to really focus on the business strategy and focus more on business development. And I think that was key, focusing on that and really saying, okay, it's not just the technology, but just doing that. The things that we did wrong, oh, so many, and I think one that was in tandem with the university. I think the commercialization, the license of it took way too long, and that's a pervasive problem of a lot of universities. And taking too long also meant that a lot of investors were discouraged. I think that we would have had more resources if that would have happened much faster. I think that we lost some opportunities to do early commercialization just because we wanted the technology to be perfect. And that was a huge mistake.
Even in hard sciences, even in hard tech?
I think especially in the hard tech, scientists tend to be they tend to like to have things that are perfectionists. They tend to be perfectionists, and that is a bad thing when you're trying to commercialize, because it's never going to be absolutely perfect. But the thing that is not perfect, it can be very, very useful. And I think that we spend way too much time trying to make it perfect and trying to figure out something that at the end we could have gone to market with something simpler. So I do regret that, and that's something that I do tell a lot of my students. Instead of spending 3 years in the lab, you should definitely go out there and take a look at the value, and what you develop might be much easier than you think that it is. And I think that another thing that we did pretty wrong is not recognize that in a market this big, there's a lot of international players that we should have gotten to interact with way sooner. And particularly the Chinese players. And I know it's difficult if you don't have a Chinese connection or you don't know how that is, but over the past decade, almost all of the manufacturing of battery technologies, except for the Panasonic plant in Nevada, but except for that, and LG plant in LG plant in Michigan, everything else is done in China. So I do regret not being more cognizant that China was an important player, and we shouldn't have been that afraid to actually reaching out.
And what would you have done? I mean, reaching out, what does that mean?
Well, it means understanding that those were the people that had the main problems. They were manufacturing batteries, and they still are manufacturing batteries in the larger scale possible. They were the ones investing a lot in manufacturing facilities that are pretty big. They were the ones taking shots on some types of technologies, and at the end, the ones that were really eager to get value out of new technologies were a lot of the Chinese companies. And I understand that we try to keep it at home because we really try to build capacity here and build plants in the US, which 100% for, and I still am. But I do think that when you are creating value, the value is everywhere. And we sort of said, no, they're not gonna derive value, or they don't have as much value as here in the US. And that's not true. I think now internationally, it's a different world, and you should take a look everywhere in the world and see where is it that what you're developing brings more value, and really focus on that.
And as far as reaching out, I mean, practically sort of trying to understand what that means. Like, you mean talking to these players and just trying to understand what their problems are, because it might lead to licensing your technology or a purchase order or something like that? I mean, I'm just actually curious on the nuts and bolts of what you mean by engaging with LG, right? Or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. So with LG, we did had some conversations, and they have a center in Santa Clara. So I ended up going there sometimes. But with companies in China, companies in Europe, and even in Japan, I should have just taken a plane and go there and talk to them and say, okay, show me how is it that you're doing things. Show me the problems. One of the things that I now tell my my postdocs in the program is, the more that you understand their life, their day-to-day life and their journey, the more that you understand what their problems are. And I should have done that. I didn't do that. And maybe it was a combination of being still naive about it and young, or maybe that was part of it was I was still in grad school. So I had some commitments to do.
Right.
But I do think that it would have been good, and it's always better if you go and with your own two eyes take a look at the life of your customer, because you understand much better what are the things that they're dealing with. And there were a lot of moments that I didn't do that, and I think I regret that. And I didn't have people around me that would basically tell me you need to. And I wish that I would have. I had wonderful advisors, but sometimes you need someone that sort of like gives you a little kick in the butt and tells you, okay, just do this, right? So.
Right. And this is the importance of understanding problems and your it's really boils down to customer development, right? Understanding and talking to your customers and understanding their needs and the detail, because in the end, you have to build something that people or customers want, right? And so I guess that if you don't understand those things, it really will hinder or affect the way that you build the technology, right? So even in hard tech, this is extremely important, this customer development. It's a concept that, I've seen popularized from the lean startup movement. And, in software, you have to get out and talk to your customers, like Y Combinator says, but really it's extremely important also for hard tech, right?
Absolutely, absolutely important. And I think it's humbling, to be honest.
Right.
Because we spend so much time really focusing on what we think is the optimal level of technology. And I always tell myself, if the world worked like that, if just the best technologies was what we used, then we would be using a whole bunch of really crazy stuff. Maybe I would be commuting in a jetpack or something like that. But we're full of very halfway technologies that are not the best of what they do, but they're really, really useful. And that is interesting to me, because that is where the real opportunity is, in building things that are extremely useful and extremely valuable, and they're not necessarily the best of the best. I don't have the phone with the best specs, but the one that I have is extremely useful. I can't live without it. And to be honest, I don't need the one with the best specs. I need the one that is actually giving me the value that I need.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a good message just in general for graduate students, for people that are in technology, is when we idolize technology a lot, we tend to either spend too much time building something that people might not like, or we end up missing the point of building technologies. And the point of building technologies is to help someone and to bring value. And that is what needs to match, not my idea of what a perfect technology is.
Right. And do you find that often researchers are sort of inventing things for the sake of inventing things? Like, it's actually a question I wanted to ask you. You know, and we can get into this, what you talk about, sort of action research, and this might be a different topic in general, but should all research, like the postdocs, for instance, that get into your program, like, should everybody who's doing research, should it be done with the idea of commercializing in the end? Like, is that what research should be done?
Not necessarily. I think that there is still some basic research that needs to be done that just brings a lot of very interesting knowledge. I have a family member that works at CERN, and
Yeah,
I
I was about to
think
say,
that
sorry. Yeah.
doing and he was on the team that built anti-hydrogen, and I think that's amazing and that's great research. And it's absolutely fascinating. Should that have a commercialization angle? No. And I don't even know what that would be, how
Right.
you would commercialize anti-hydrogen. So not
Sounds
necessarily,
expensive.
but yeah, very expensive. Yeah. But I do think that there is a lot of but that doesn't mean that as a researcher, you shouldn't be interested in how is it that you can build technologies that are commercializable, and that angle is also very important. And the reality is that a lot of the people that are in universities right now are building technologies that are very useful and fairly good candidates for being commercialized. So in that sense, yes, they should definitely take a look at that when it's appropriate. And I don't think that people are just researching for the sake of researching or doing papers for the sake of doing papers. I think that there are incentives that make them do that. And that's the part that I feel that universities could do a better job to and change in changing those incentives. Because if the incentive is, for example, look, I'm going to raise your salary if you do 10 more papers every year, what am I going to do? I'm going to do 10 more papers every year, right?
Right.
So that is, it's fairly straightforward. So the incentive should be more about outcomes, about impact, about how are you engaging with your society. uh, and if you change the incentives and not necessarily give a lot of power to one or the other one, but really say doing these activities like commercializing, like going out there are really, really important. And if you want to do that, right? So if someone really wants to do that and they feel that that is what fulfills them, then we're going to reward you for that. And the great example is Bob Langer. Bob Langer is, I think, the person that has demonstrated that you don't need to be either or. You can be, you can be both. These great scientists that create amazing things. There's also these great scientists that can commercialize other stuff, and you get to choose. But whatever you get to choose, you should have the backup of the institution telling you, yes, this is good. This is something that you need to do. And this gives me a good opportunity to also talk about one thing that we do at the Runway program, and it is that our philosophy is that this program is an opportunity for people to take the time and figure out if an idea that they have it has those legs and can be commercialized. But we are very okay with not with failing at that idea, because that's also the point. The point is, take a look at it and see if it works or not. And if it doesn't work, that's fine. That should not destroy your whole career. That should just tell you, okay, this was not a good idea, or this didn't work, or it's not commercializable, whatever. And then they can continue to do what they want. And we should have more spaces for that, more spaces for that very healthy experimentation and healthy commercialization.
And this, actually plays into this day one project that you are an author on and a leader in, right? I mean, this is, you're trying to basically create this successful fellowship model that you've done at Runway and extrapolate it to the rest of the United States. Can you speak a bit about that?
Yeah, so obviously at the Runway program in the Jacobs Institute, we now see the results of that, having had 32 companies go over the program, and we understand that the methodology works pretty well. At the same time, we're not the only one, and I do give a lot of credit to Elon Gore that built Cyclotron Road and now Activate, and even ARPA-E, which is another contributed, Cheryl that was at ARPA-E before. So we prove that giving the space to scientists and giving them the mentoring and the resources and the push and the connections and helping them commercialize really creates wonderful, amazing things, really works. So we're not a lot of us that are doing this, but we are proving that this angle really works. And with the Day One project, what we're saying to the federal government is, look, we've done it before. It's been done at the Jacobs Institute here at Cornell Tech. It's been done at Cyclotron Road. It's been done at Activate. It was done with ARPA-E. Why not really put a lot of effort behind it and put $100 million and do this on a national level? And that makes a lot of sense to me. And it's basically saying, we know the methodology. We know that this works. And it is a very, very interesting and powerful way of building commercial enterprises out of hard tech, really hard science, both on the hardware and the software side. It works for any of those.
And if we boil it down to the top, like the very high level points, it's literally about giving the space to these researchers, to the space and the resources and the advice on how to get this. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, yes, but not just the space, but be there with them, helping them, and make it give them the space, but also give them the right amount of time. I think that's what we're missing. Yeah,
right.
I think that's what we're missing a lot of it. Yeah.
No, so it's 2 years of time where they're they have a salary, and they have budget to do prototypes and other things like that. But it's really just this. I mean, like the temporal and physical space to be able to take this thing to the next level. You said something a little earlier where you said, you think, and I kind of have this theory too, and I'm curious as to your thoughts on it, but that there are tons of researchers all around the world that are inventing great stuff, and then what happens to it, right? And so you're sort of making this argument, I think, that there's no place for it to go, and the research is just kind of sitting there. Is that correct?
In a lot of instances, yes, you're absolutely right. There's a lot of people inventing great things, and they're just sitting there and they don't know what to do. They don't even know how to get started. That's the first step, and they don't know who to reach out to.
So is there an opportunity to take that stuff and do something with it? Stuff that isn't necessarily something that a postdoc just invented and now he's in the fellowship and he can take it to the next level. Stuff that somebody has already invented, let's say, that is just sitting there gathering dust, that could be some type of breakthrough that just hasn't been given the physical and temporal space to grow into that next level.
I think that there are a lot of I said exchanges or people that have been trying to do libraries of intellectual property that is out there, and that's okay. I think that is good to have, but I really think that the key thing is not just to say, oh, there's a technology and how do we commercialize it. The key thing is, how do we help people be the drivers of that commercial effort? Because the piece of paper can be there, but if there's no one behind it, it just does not work. And if you take the person that did that work, that had that idea, that had that excitement, that is the best vehicle for commercializing technologies. So instead of just saying, oh, can we put it in a repository and see who likes it, the idea is, can we take this person that does not have either the time or the resources or the community to build this? And can we give them that? Can we give them the time, the full on time? I would say that one of the problems that I also see with this is that still commercial efforts, particularly within universities, are seen as a side project. So you're doing your graduate degree, and as a side project, you're doing this. You're doing a postdoc, and as a side project, you're doing this. Even as a professor, as a side project, you're doing commercialization. And yes, if you're a professor, your full-time job might be more to do research, but you can take people and tell them, I will give you full time. I will give you 1 or 2 years full time for you to explore this. And we're not saying that 100% of the time is going to work, but that's the beauty of it. If you give the right amount of time, which is 100% of the time, I would say the right amount of time is like 150% of the time, which is like, that's usually what we entrepreneurs spend. We spend all of this time and mind and effort and heart into this. So if you give that opportunity to someone, that's where beautiful things can happen. But we don't have that right now. We, except for a program like myself and Activate and Cyclotron, we don't have that right now. So we need to give people that time and that dedication so that they can basically be themselves and give them the role. And then say, it can work, and if it works, it's wonderful. We create companies that are creating jobs, that are obviously creating new technologies and value. And if it doesn't, then that person really learned how to do it, and they might do it again, and they might do it again and again, or they might go back to sort of an academic role or an industry role, but with a whole bunch of interesting knowledge that is just going to make them a lot better. So it's a win-win. I don't see the drawback on doing this, to be honest. We should be doing it either way. I think impact-wise is just a win.
And I like this idea that and I believe this too, that people are actually the driver of these changes, right? So there have been these libraries of licensable technology and all these, but really it's about stimulating people to actually take these things and do something with them, right? They're the levers that will enact change and growth and stuff like that.
Yes, it needs to be people-centric. I always say, if you're going to make a company, is right there in the name, means that you need to be accompanied by someone. That needs to be at least a couple of people, right? And,
I like that.
And it needs to be that way. It needs to be that people are driving this, and you're helping people doing it, because the technology does not live just itself in vacuum, and it's not going to do much. People are the ones that drive it, the ones that move it.
Right,
That's
pushing it,
important.
yeah. And let me ask you this. So this is an interesting idea or subject rather, but what are the qualities that are necessary, let's say, for one of these postdocs to become this entrepreneur? I mean, I assume that you believe that it can be taught, it can be learned. These are skills that all can be developed. Are there qualities that they should come with before? What are some of these key lessons or ideas that you try to impart that people should absorb and take forward?
So the first thing that I think is important for them to know is that entrepreneurship does have a methodology. And that is key, because I think we tend to idealize a lot of the people that we see out there, and we say, oh, that's an innate entrepreneur, and that's such a hustler, and I don't have that personality. I wasn't born an entrepreneur. I think that there's a lot of people that have very interesting personalities, and that they're way more outgoing than I am, and they do pretty well in entrepreneurship. They're great. But that doesn't necessarily mean that if you're not, you couldn't be a good entrepreneur. There is a methodology behind it, and you can learn that methodology and develop something as an entrepreneur. So I think that's important, because that demystifies that part, that you cannot be an entrepreneur. You can be, and there's a methodology, and if you follow the methodology, you can become your own version of being an entrepreneur. But what that implies too is that you need to have a quality which is extremely important, and is coachability. You need to be able to listen. You need to be able to process the information that people are giving you, make decisions with that information, and learn from what's happening. And without coachability, I don't think that it is possible to get you there. And that I think has been the most one of the most challenging things to have is really figure out if a person has that capability of being coachable or not. Not everybody has that capability. That's just the reality of things.
Yeah, it's super interesting. Coachability is key. You can have none of these skills whatsoever, but as long as you're able to be taught them, the sky is the limit, I guess. Very cool. And so if we go back to, and I'm going to try to do a few kind of rapid fire questions here. Actually, one thing that is interesting, so you also write about entrepreneurship, like you publish papers about entrepreneurship. I actually tried to read one of the papers that you published.
I think those are like breaks, so I give you a lot of props for trying
Well,
to
no,
read
what I was
them.
going to say is actually I only was able to read the abstract because otherwise it would have cost me, you know, $35 or $50 or something to read the entire paper. So I wonder what if you have an opinion on that. It's kind of an aside, but just this idea of papers and accessibility to sort of new ideas and intellectual property and why it's very difficult. Like it's interesting that the universities, right, encourage you to generate papers. And at the same time, there's this sort of wall around these papers for anybody that, like me, for instance, that doesn't attend a university to access. And at the same time, I hear that there are universities, even large ones, like I think some of the UCs, for instance, that don't pay for subscriptions for their students. And so they're like on these Russian sites downloading papers illegally and all of this crazy stuff just to access this intellectual property. Can you speak a little bit about that? I just thought it was funny that I tried to read your thoughts on fellowships in entrepreneurship and the Runway program, and you generated this awesome paper that would have cost me a bunch of money to access.
Yeah, that part of the academic system is entirely broken.
Yeah.
I don't think it should be like that at all. And it's awful. It's awful that all of this amazing knowledge is behind paywalls. And I'm not against publishers trying to make money and hire people and be revenue positive. That's okay. But there needs to be some innovation there that basically allows people to get this knowledge and still be able to participate in this knowledge. That is not a good thing that we have these paywalls. One of the key things, and actually I did also publish some papers on the relationship between knowledge and economic growth, particularly towards productivity. And having more knowledge is directly correlated with economic growth and with multi-factor productivity. Just being able to access that knowledge and build upon that knowledge. So it is something that I see some instances where this is changing. I really like Archive, which is a model that Cornell has on doing a more open sourceable, like pre-publishing type of thing where people can really access it. And it has tons of knowledge. Obviously, the internet has made things a lot more open, but it's still not there. It's still not there, and it's shameful. We shouldn't have that. And I do say that this is a problem that I also saw, and we don't think about this a lot, but when I was back in Colombia, where I'm from originally, I couldn't access anything. I really
Yeah.
And having access to any publication is super complicated. And the libraries at that point in time were really lagging just in time. Publications, even if you had a subscription to Nature, the publication that you would get there wasn't necessarily, right at the same time. And look, having this publication a week before everybody else makes a huge difference.
Right.
So that definitely needs to change. And another interesting problem to solve.
Yeah, no kidding. There's a ton. And so, if we move over a little bit to TTOs, technology transfer organizations, I mean, you're pushing this fellowship model. I'm curious how TTOs kind of fit into that in your head, and in general, are they getting better? What are they doing that's right? What are they doing that's wrong still? Can you speak to that at
For,
all?
for the TTO, yeah. One of the things that we're doing, and again, we're really thinking about this program as an experimental ground for a lot of things like how do you do licensing, how do you pay for patenting, how do you support entrepreneurs that way, and we've had a model that is extremely friendly. I mean, it's ridiculously friendly to the entrepreneur.
Yeah, well,
But
what
I
are
think
some
that
of what are some of the terms? I mean, what are some of these things that you think are, or what are your theses on these, that on these experiments that you're trying to prove here? If you could speak, even specifics, I think would be very interesting for some of our listeners.
Yeah, that's a great point, because look, some of the problems that these technology transfer officers have. So the first problem is that they're sitting on a bunch of technologies that are there on paper and they need to commercialize, and there's no one around. So how do you solve that? The best way of solving that is not to just go out there and try to find people. Is from the get-go, have the people that made this, give them the opportunity in this space to commercialize it. So the model of the fellowship, that's what it does. It doesn't leave any technology behind. And what it does is it funds the journey of these people so that they become the drivers of innovation. It's kind of interesting because I have in my program, I have 0 pieces of paper that are not commercialized.
Right.
And that's the point, right? So that is the first experiment that we're running, and I think that that's important. That's an important change that TTOs need to start doing. It's not about generating papers. It's about getting from the get-go and saying every piece of intellectual property needs to be you need to fund and support the journey so that every piece gets commercialized. So that's the first part that we're doing that I think it needs to change.
But there is a barrier, right? Like there are applicants that you do not accept, right? I mean, there are bad inventions out there that shouldn't be commercialized, right?
Yeah,
Or
well,
no?
there
I don't
are.
know.
I don't know. I tend to. I don't like to say that they're bad ideas. Maybe they're. Well, no, there are bad ideas because I've had a whole bunch of them.
Right.
So, no, you're right. It's not like everything needs to be commercialized. But then, what is the point of paying 20 years for a patent?
A patent, right.
If at the end you're not gonna take the effort to commercializing it? I think that the question, I do think that every single pieces of this technology needs to have that driving it. Whether the first effort is successful or not, whether you don't that first commercialization effort fails, that's a different question. And I fully expect a lot of these teams that are building something maybe to fail in that commercialization, and maybe that technology, if it sits there and the case of Gorilla Glass, right? So Corning had this sitting on a shelf for many years, and then all of a sudden, oh no, this actually appeared and it was very good for giving value for something that didn't exist before. But there was an initial effort. It's Gorilla Glass.
Oh, Gorilla Glass.
Gorilla Glass, yeah, the one that made iPhone very successful.
Right.
Yeah, and right now it's not called that way, but still Corning makes all of these glass displays. But that technology Corning had developed many years before. I think it was a decade before, and they had tried to commercialize it, but it was basically too good for what it was needed at that point in time.
Right.
So if you make that effort of commercializing something, maybe you get to that conclusion, right? Maybe if you commercialize it, awesome. If you get to that conclusion that it's just too early, it's just too good or something like that, well, that's different. Now you have a body of knowledge that tells you what that is and what it's going to be good for, and you can continue to look for opportunities. But if you don't do anything from the beginning, that's a problem. I do think that just the point of making the paper and doing it and just shelving it, that's not what it should be. So coming back to your question, the first thing that TTOs really struggle with is having this mountain of papers that they need to commercialize. So it just needs to change the dynamic. So there's always an effort of commercialization right from the get-go. The other one, because the TTOs they need to actually make money for universities, right? And they need to commercialize this and have an impact. But they're also risk adverse because universities are risk adverse. So
which is funny because they're the stewards of the nation's research, right? Like the nation's R&D. How could it's very oxymoronic, right?
Yeah, it is. It is. It's crazy, and it, but at the same time, you can understand why, and particularly if there's an institution that has been around for many years, they're not going to want to say, "Oh, I gave this away," or there's all of these processes, and processes and bureaucracy are good in larger institutions, but they have really gotten in the way of commercializing a lot of these technologies, and we still see cases where there are TTOs that are doing these license agreements that take 2 years. That happened to me, and that is ridiculous. There's no reason why you need to do that. There's no reason why you need to ask a startup company to give sales projections of 10 years. I mean, everybody likes them because no one knows what's going to happen in 10 years.
Right.
So I think there must be a simplification of the process of licensing. And we do that. We have a license that is perpetual, transferable, is exclusive to the entrepreneur. And to be honest, there's nothing to negotiate because it's so friendly that what are you going to negotiate? It's already exclusive. It's already perpetual. So we tend to sign it in a day.
You tend to sign it in a day. Wow.
Yeah.
And can you just touch on for some of our listeners that might not know this idea of exclusivity and this idea of perpetual license?
Yeah, the idea is that if you're developing something, you want to have the capacity of, first off, using it by yourself and not that someone else is using it. So you don't want the university to say, well, I license it to you, but then I also license it to Apple. That's basically, yeah, that's exclusivity, right? So that's basically saying like, okay, we sort of like give you one cookie and then we do a buffet for Apple, right? So you're going to cater to the bigger one that has more resources. So exclusivity means putting the efforts into that one piece and saying we're going to give you all of the tools so that you are the one that are really going to have the power to do this and to compete with everybody else. That one's important. Perpetuity is also important because if you're an investor that wants to put money into this, then all of a sudden it's okay, I have a license for just 1 year. I mean, it's too risky, right? Even 2 years, even 3 years, you don't know. So if there's not a continuity in what you want to do, or at least the expectation, right? So I think at some point in time, if things are not working, there's always ways of saying, okay, we stop it and we can do something else. But if I'm an investor, I'm going to put money into something, and I said every 2 years I have to renegotiate a license with a university.
Yeah.
The first thing that they're going to be like, oh, why am I going to bother? Right? So those are. It's all about incentives. That's the most important part. Is the incentives for de-risking things in TTOs are contrary to the incentives of building startup companies. And that's what we need to start merging, that the incentives are the same so that, we are very helpful to these entrepreneurs and we give them the chance. We give them the chance to actually grow it and explore it.
And do you, just curious about royalties or anything like that? I mean, are those part of the license agreement that you engage with, or?
So again, for our case, we don't ask for any royalties. We don't ask for any payments. We only ask for equity in the company.
Can I ask how much?
It tends to be, for the Runway program between 6 and 7%, depending, because we have this very friendly investment safe, as a simple agreement for future equity,
right?
That is monthly. So at that point in time, you could stop it and get a little bit less. But if you stay with us for the full 2 years, it's going to be around a little bit less than 7% of the company,
which is
for around 300K. So it is a very good deal.
Yeah, and that's what incubators are. The good incubators are working, or the best incubators, I should say, and accelerators and stuff seem to be working with is something in that framework.
That's much friendlier because the ones like Y Combinator and 500 subs, they're more between 100 and 150, and they ask for 7%.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. So they're a little bit higher than us. So this is a good deal, but again, we're pushing the boundaries of these type of deals because we feel that is still that is actually a good incentive for the university. The more friendly that the university gets, the more chance of the company to survive. If I'm taking cash out of a company in a very early stage, I'm just hindering the company. I'm just shooting myself in the foot, right? It makes no sense. And it might be really stupid because then I give them money and then they give me money back. So it's, it's like I never gave them anything. So I don't necessarily agree with that model. I do understand that for universities, one problem has traditionally been that handling equity is not that simple for a non-for-profit institution, particularly when it becomes a large portfolio. Is not impossible, but some of them have said, well, I would rather just get cash,
Right.
whatever amount it is, but just give me cash and that's that. I get it, but I think that right now there's enough tools for them to really take the really take the risk and go there and try to really motivate and say, look, we get equity, we go along this ride with you. The more that you do better, the more that we do better. And so we are aligning incentives. We're not taking money out of you. We're not taking all this time that you should be spending doing something else, negotiating a license. And that is a much better way of working, to be honest. And I still feel that it's not real life because I've been in the other shoe where it took me years to negotiate license agreements. It takes me years to actually do even amendments. And then there's this world in this program where things actually work, and it's encouraging. But at the same time, I hope that we can expand this model.
Right, you're living in commercialization utopia.
Yeah, fairly land. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, hopefully we can
And
spread it around. Yeah.
hopefully, yes. But we want to tell people also, because we've done some experiments that did not work. And so we're not saying that everything that we do is perfect. But there are things that work, there are things that don't. And I think that there should be a space for that. And that's what we want to be. And what I definitely want to create is a space for experimentation. And as with any other large institutions, some things take time and you should experiment. And once you have some results from that experiment, you can say, oh, yeah, we can do this, or no, we shouldn't do this. And then that's good enough for me.
Spoken like a true scientist. You mentioned some of the grants that you've gotten. I think you've gotten NSF, NYSERDA. Can you talk about the importance of these things and going after them and best practices and any thoughts on those?
Yeah, I still think that that's one of the most amazing things about the US is the whole infrastructure for grants, for federal grants and also state grants. I'm so grateful to the National Science Foundation for everything that they do, and to NYSERDA. It's a wonderful, wonderful institution. And what it really does is provide that de-risking that is definitely needed in a lot of these technologies. I think that the grants that work out better are the ones like NSF is doing with the I-Corps program, the ones that you're saying, well, yes, you do this on the technology, but at the same time, we want you to really put some effort and time, and we even give you money to do some of the commercialization work and customer discovery. That's the core idea of that's the idea of the I-Corps program.
And you're a mentor there?
Building. I am an instructor there.
Instructor,
yes. I'm a nationally certified instructor for that, and we definitely see a lot of progress in these teams, and it becomes a thing of it becomes the like a safeguard for public funds, which I really like. I call it fiscal responsibility, which is you're spending federal money, so that's money that is taxpayers' money. And you're spending it because you're giving a team like myself money to figure out something and commercialize it. So if you're going to spend that money, you should make sure that the group that is trying to commercialize it, you give them the tools and resources to understand how to commercialize it. And that's what the I-Corps program does. It gives $50,000 to do customer discovery. And I do think that increases the possibility of these enterprises to become successful, and successful means to become self-sustainable, to create jobs, to add to the economy. So it is absolutely fiscal responsibility to add that commercialization component, but still keep the component of doing research, which is really, really, really important. And to me, that whole grant system is the one that has made the US incredibly successful in creation of new technologies and new companies.
Is there a preferred allocation for R&D and customer discovery? Like it's a mix, right? Is there something, I'm just curious, is there something that you recommend that people kind of budget for?
Yeah, I think each case is different. I would say.
Right.
I don't know. So it cannot be zero either way. That's the key thing. But it can also be, you cannot be stingy with commercialization either, which is what tends to happen. And a lot of the tech-driven entrepreneurs are saying, "Oh yeah, in my $1.5 million budget, I hired 10 engineers and 1 intern on marketing."
Right.
No, that's not definitely what you should do at all. You should put muscle into this too. So the balance is important. Everyone needs to assess what do they need to commercialize, and there needs to be more knowledge and awareness and training on how to build that balance to create a good company.
Yeah. Are there any resources on customer discovery that you like that come to mind?
Well, yeah, obviously the I-Corps program, and if you go online, you can see what they have, which it's a fairly well proven methodology. All of the work of Steve Blank that you can see online.
Right.
Stanford University has a lot of great things. Bill Aldett at MIT, I think, has this discipline entrepreneurship, which is also great. So I think we're all pretty aligned into doing customer discovery, and there's tons of resources online for it. Yeah, YouTube is a great place actually to find these videos.
Yeah. Excellent. Okay, very cool. And we're nearing the end here. I know I want to be respectful of your time. I have just a couple more questions. So if you had to give advice to young entrepreneurs or grad students or whatever these days, what would you say? It can be anything.
Yeah, the first one is find your tribe. And it means find the people that are thinking the same way that you are thinking, or that are having the same frustrations that you are. And that's pretty important, because I see a lot of people that are young scientists that are frustrated because they want to try entrepreneurship, they want to do a different career, and they're in an environment that does not support that. So find the tribe that supports it. I think that's the best thing. And the community is extremely, extremely important.
Excellent. And if you had to give advice to yourself back when you were a young, not that you're not young, but when you were a young entrepreneur, spinning something out of the lab, I mean, any advice that you would give to yourself?
I would have said to, I would have liked to start sooner. I think that as many other people, I think that I had this path that was charted by a society, that was charted by the expectations, and the path was not a bad path. I mean, the path of you go to college and then you get a degree and then you get a job, and that's not necessarily a bad path. But I always had this idea of creating different things and doing a lot of entrepreneurship and building new things, and I wish I could have started sooner so that I would have made mistakes sooner. It is important to make mistakes sooner. It's important to make mistakes when you have the capacity to make them. At some point in time, life gets to be very complicated, and I see a lot of these entrepreneurs that say, look, I have a family, I have a couple of kids, I don't know how to take the plunge. Even one problem that we don't really talk about is that a lot of these entrepreneurship programs are not even giving health insurance. So you're saying, why am I going to do that if I'm not going to have health insurance, if I'm not going to get my immigration stuff done right? Those are big issues. So if you can take the plunge early on, when you have less of these barriers, the better. And that's what I would have told myself, is just really try to do this much sooner, fail as much sooner. And I think I would have learned a lot more by now, but no complaints. And yeah, I'm still young, right? So we're all going to live 200 years, right? So
yeah, hopefully, if these dang researchers do their job, yeah, we should live at least that long.
I'm counting on it.
Yeah, us too. So Fernando, this has been really excellent. The Runway program has an upcoming deadline for submission or something like that, right?
Yes, February 15th, we close submission for the program to start in September 1st.
And does someone have to be from Cornell? No, right? They can be a postdoc from anywhere?
No, anywhere in the world, go to the website and you can apply as long as you have a PhD and you have an idea. It doesn't even need to be formed. As you apply, you're going to see that the application is made so that we start guiding you. But the best people that we have is the people that have a PhD and have no idea how to get started. That's exactly what we want, anywhere in the world.
Wow, amazing. And what's the ratio? I'm just curious, the ratio of like accepted versus applied. The percentage of accepted, yeah.
Yeah, we have been taking about 10%. And as we grow, it might be less than that. I'm making a lot of efforts to increase that number. The issue right now, a lot of it is funding because it's an expensive program, but we definitely want to have more impact on it. But that's more or less the application, 10%.
But that's really awesome. If you have a PhD and an idea, you're from anywhere in the world, apply to the Runway program. Fernando, thank you so much. Where can people find you online if they want to reach out or?
If they put Fernando at Cornell, I think I might be on Google, on LinkedIn for sure. Yeah, look for me. And that is literally my email too. So Fernando at Cornell.edu. So I always give it because I'm very reachable there, and people that are interested can email me and we can connect.
Okay, we'll link to all your stuff. This has been really awesome. Thank you so much for doing this. This is Out of the Lab, and we are guest Fernando. Apply to the Runway program, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. Thanks, Fernando, for joining us. Have a good one.
Thank you for inviting me. Thanks. Bye.
Thanks for listening. But now we need your help. We're building a community of scientists, students, entrepreneurs, industry leaders, and investors to commercialize meaningful technology and research. Join us at bountiful.work today to find opportunities and realize your power to save the world.